Briefly, what comes to mind when the World Bank is mentioned?
The first thing which comes to mind is imposition, is a subversion of democracy, and is economic difficulties and so on. These are the things which come to mind immediately. Imposition because over the years that the World Bank has been active in Ghana, our people have not actively participated in the choosing of paradigms of different options of development and so on. They've dealt with our governments, and our governments have tended to impose, basically the models that they agree with the IMF and the World Bank on us. It's also significant to recall that for most part that the IMF and the World Bank have operated in our country, they've had to deal with unelected military dictatorships. So you mentioned the World Bank, and the picture you get is military men in jackboots, imposing policy decisions on us and so on. Economic hardship also because the policies that have been implemented here have led in large measure to widening the unemployment situation, to worsening the unemployment situation, to killing, for example, the rice industry in the north, and so on. And the industrial capacity of Ghana is shrinking over the years and so on. Hardship also because over the years the debt burden has tended to increase. And for the 20 years that the National Democratic Congress implemented the structural adjustment program, for example, our national debt, both internal and external, total something like 41 trillion cedis and so on. So these are the kinds of pictures you get when you hear about the World Bank.
Interestingly, what you are saying is in direct contrast to what the World Bank tells us, that the government draws up their program and they support them. Do you still hold what you are saying? You think what the World Bank is saying is right?
Well, it may be true that governments draw up their programs and they support them, but they do that in the full knowledge that these are unaccountable governments. They do that in the full knowledge that in large measure the governments are unelected. Why? They were dealing with the PNDC for close to how many years? And they knew that the government had no mandate, and yet they continued to deal with the government. To turn around and tell us that it's your government which draws up the program and we are only compelled to deal with the government and so on, is to legitimize these undemocratic aberrations in our politics.
Are you suggesting that the World Bank should have overthrown military regime before?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. Nobody is suggesting that the World Bank should overthrow military regimes. But the World Bank should not give legitimacy to military regimes. And the World Bank should be interested, or if it's promoting development, then it's dealing with the aspirations of people. It's dealing with the interests of people and so on. Those interests and aspirations can only be expressed in the democratic arrangement.
That's what I'm saying. In the absence of democracy, you want the World Bank to wait till democracy comes, or they should, their policies are to reduce poverty, basically.
But they haven't reduced poverty to start with.
We are talking about in the early 80s, 1981, we all know what this economy was all about. Okay, in total shambles, infrastructure was all down to nothing. Okay, today the story is different. You see, nothing happens.
We are looking at different indicators. The World Bank, IMF, and to a very large extent, our governments look at the macroeconomic indicators. They talk about GDP growth of 3% and so on. They talk about increases in per capita income and so on. The reality is that these are statistical averages and may not reflect significant improvements in the conditions of life of the vast majority of our people. For example, if we talk about GDP growing by 3%, what does it mean? It is possible that 10% of the population grew by so much, and that would account for this apparent rate of growth and so on. So it's important for us to go beyond these statistical averages and look at the real conditions of lives of our people. Now, if we did that, we would find out, for example, that over the last 4 years, guinea worm infestation, the figures are rising. We will find out, for example, that the quality of education is falling and so on, in spite of the infusion of so-called aid from so-called developing partners and so on. Our conditions are getting worse. we are getting more and more entrapped, you know, in the debt problem and so on.
Why don't you call them development partners or aids? Why do you add so-called aids or so-called development partners?
Well, I do add so-called because if their activities and the policies they promote over a period of time leads to the virtual extinction of the rice industry in the northern region, for example, you cannot call that development. You understand? If it leads, for example, between 1983 and 1986, we lost 300,000 jobs in the public sector alone. That is not development. We are increasingly getting into debt and so on. You can't call that development.
Do you have any kind words at all?
Kind words?
Yes.
I don't think that we are talking about kind words. Well, if you're expecting kind words, there are no kind words to describe the excruciating poverty that our people have to face on a daily basis. There are no kind words to describe the unemployment that our people face. There are no kind words to describe the debt burden. There are no kind words to describe, you know, the imposition of policies on the people who have suffered years of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade and so on. There are no kinds of words to describe this.
Are you saying that I should forget the asphalted road that goes through my village somewhere in the Upper West region? Are you saying I should forget that when I go home and my mother, my old lady, can switch on power, okay, rather than use a local lantern? Okay, are you saying I should all of that is non-existent? Nothing really has happened. Are you saying that the borehole that she goes to pump water, clean water to drink, and avoid Guinea rain is all non-existent?
There is a very dangerous assumption in your question. The dangerous assumption in your question is that 18 million people cannot do anything for themselves unless the World Bank shows up.
That's not what I'm saying.
And I think that that's a dangerous assumption.
No, I'm just saying.
It is possible for our people to switch on electric lights. It is possible for our people to eat nutritious food without the World Bank. And that's a fact. And I think that that is what we ought to be aiming at. We ought to be aiming at building self-sustaining societies which are able to pull themselves from their bootstraps, you know, without external dictation. That is the ideal that all of us are looking for. Indeed, that is the ideal that sometimes the World Bank pretends that it is looking for.
So you are saying this country could have done without the World Bank?
Given the kinds of suffering that we have been through, given the kinds of problems that our people have faced. For example, take water. There's an insistence that we should privatize water. And everybody knows of the economic significance, economic and social significance of water for our people. We do know as a fact that our people are living in deplorable conditions already. We do know that the privatization of water would raise costs, deny people access and so on. And yet this is being pushed. We are being told, for example, that we cannot subsidize local agriculture, when we do know that all the industrialized countries are subsidizing their agriculture and so on. These are problems.
You still haven't answered my question.
Yeah.
One more time. Are you saying I should ignore the asphalted road that goes through my little village somewhere in the Upper West region?
The asphalted road is not development by itself. The asphalted road becomes development within a context. If the asphalted roads lead to a situation where less people die from malaria than they do today, you might talk about it as
That's
development.
just one example.
I'm coming. Just hang on a minute. If the asphalted roads lead to us avoiding post-harvest losses of our crops and so on, then we are talking about development. But if we build asphalted roads, and in the midst of building the asphalted roads, more and more children are dying out of malaria. Our rice industry is collapsing. The cotton industry is in crisis. Cocoa is in crisis and so on. What is the point of the asphalted road?
So you see in the World Bank some kind of God that when they say they are here to develop the country, they must do it holistically. If that doesn't happen,
I think that the primary
happen, it's either holistic or nothing at all. Is that what you mean?
I think that the primary responsibility.
You're not answering the question.
I am answering the question if you just listen. I'm saying that the primary responsibility for our development is in our own hands. It is the people of Ghana who will decide how to develop, and it is the people of Ghana who will develop themselves. So the World Bank cannot be God.
But
Indeed, it is impossible.
Where we have demonstrated ourselves, okay, through all the military dictatorship and all that, you know, we bore the brunt of the NDC for how many long years before we, you know, go through elections and all that, okay? So are you saying military dictatorships, okay, and you know, examples of maladministration on our own, you know, part, okay, we can't basically govern ourselves? Are you saying it was a mistake for the World Bank to come and try and correct and help us to come out of our, some of our problems, not all of them?
I think there's another assumption which is not backed by the facts at all, and that is that we cannot govern ourselves. I think that we are very capable of governing ourselves if we will be allowed alone. The first successful coup d'etat in Ghana occurred on February 24, 1966. The declassified documents of the Central Intelligence Agency are available for all to see. It was inspired, it was planned, and it was executed by the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America. There is evidence that every coup d'etat we have had in Ghana, in Africa, has had some foreign inspiration, usually from those who make the loudest noises about democracy. The evidence is there, and that is very clear. You talk about the World Bank and so on, as if they are neutral institutions who are only looking for development and so on. December last year, we went for an election. They had reached an agreement with the Kufuor administration, for example, to postpone the increase in fuel prices until February this year. Why did they do that? Because they wanted to give the Kufuor administration some leeway to win the election. Everybody knew that if the Kufuor administration had increased the price of fuel before the elections, it would have had a terrible effect on the result.
Are you blaming this on the World Bank?
It's manipulation of aid, manipulation of the national economy for partisan political interests, and that is not good for our people.
Are you saying we ourselves are incapable of deciding that we will not increase fuel prices until after the elections?
No, that is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we have client regimes. Client and pliant regimes. And when you have client and pliant regimes that the Western countries want to maintain in power, this is what happens. Why? If it had been another government that the West did not like, they would have insisted that the price of petrol should go up. And it should go up because we are being strangulated. Look at the debt burden, and the little reliefs which are being given to us. And they think, the MPP thinks that it is so crucial and therefore they must listen. Why? Other forces in this country would not succumb to those pressures. But basically, we have a neo-colonial regime in power, and they and the World Bank and the IMF and the Western countries have the same thinking.
The World Bank didn't go to the ballot box to vote for this government.
But they influenced it.
Private Ghanaian individuals, who went in there and comprinted and virtually put this government back into power.
You're absolutely right.
I think it's a long shot.
You're absolutely right. But what you forget is that the thumb printing represented feelings. The thumb printing represented knowledge which had accumulated to the Ghanaian people. The thumb printing represented attitudes and so on. If the people were deceived into believing that petrol prices were not going to go up, that in some way decided how the thumb printed the thumb prints were placed on the ballot box.
Again, you think the Ghanaian voter is incapable of deciding who?
No, when information is denied a Ghanaian voter, we are talking about information which is available to these multilateral institutions and the donor agencies, which they deliberately denied to the Ghanaian people.
You run a private media house.
Sure.
That hundreds of your partners, involved in the same process, private, government, and all that. Are you saying that wasn't information? It didn't provide sufficient information for people to make up their minds?
As a matter of fact, what happened was that we got the information from the website of the IMF, and we published it, and government denied it, and the IMF kept a convenient silence. And the inevitable happened. The MPP won power. In a couple of weeks, maximum of 2 weeks, we'll be saddled with a huge petroleum price increase. The people could have avoided that if it had become an election issue. We prevented it from becoming an election issue because we wanted a right-wing liberal regime to be in power. And this amounts to an interference in the internal affairs of our country.
If you were voted into power in 2004, and you came out in 2005 to buy fuel at $10 per barrel, you were going to sell it for $5 per barrel?
Again, the assumptions are wrong. The assumptions are wrong.
Question.
No, the assumptions are wrong. There is an assumption that petrol is being subsidized. The price of petrol is being subsidized. That assumption is wrong. There's a huge tax element on petrol, and in calculating the price, we've got to take account of that tax element. I think that we're making assumptions which are not true at all. Today, the United States sells a gallon of petrol for $2. We do know that there are federal taxes, we do know that there are state taxes and so on. In spite of that, they are able to sell it at less than $20,000 per gallon, and the United States is not subsidizing petrol for its people. You understand? So if we are selling it at 20,000 and we are clamoring to increase it, there must be some reason other than increasing freight charges and crude oil prices on the world market.
The government doesn't need taxes?
Oh, the government certainly needs taxes, but the area where government taxes also determines the government's priorities. Now, if all the government does is to slap taxes on petroleum products, the government is not thinking. Anybody can do that. Any little boy can do that. I mean, why? Just slap taxes on petroleum, no problem.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. TumpaaniTV, healthy TV for you.
Yeah, for a reason, 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 yeah, for a reason.